Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session. My name is Saskia. I'm Jennifer. Hi, good morning. We're from Acker, and we want to talk to you about how to fund system change. By actually giving an example of how we're actually approaching the topic ourselves at Acker and some international best practices we've seen. Before we go into it, how do we want to structure the session? First, we want to introduce ourselves and briefly introduce what we do at Acker. Then we want to talk about what the actual challenges are in funding system change, and maybe also want to hear a bit from you and how you're approaching and seeing the topic. And then we want to go into some cases, philanthropy, collaborative philanthropy, our Acker System Change Alliance, and maybe collect some learnings. So who are actually we, and what is our personal positioning to the topic of funding or system change? So first of all, my name is Saskia. So in my past life, I used to be a venture capital investor. So I come from the for-profit side of things, both on the startup and on the investor side. Then I had some sort of a purpose crisis, a big sabbatical journey that brought me into the non-profit and impact field, and finally brought me to Acker, which is somehow a bit of a healing journey for me to find this environment where both, like a real entrepreneurial journey on the one hand, but actual impact are possible. So that's my sort of background and also my positioning to funding, so to say.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jennifer, and I've got a similar journey, I would say, coming from a different perspective. I've always worked on communications and marketing side in the for-profit world, mainly media and publishing industry, but I've also worked as a co-founder of a startup. So I've been on the receiving side or the searching side for money. So I've known that pretty well. And I've had a similar crisis, probably, coming also from the Corona journey that the startup was heavily impacted. It was an e-commerce startup. So I really thought about what else can we do with communications and what else is there to actually focus on. And so I also found Acker, and I'm quite happy to be there, but I'm on the communication side. So today also I'm more of an assisting role. I'm going to help Saskia, assist Saskia, probably going to take some of your challenges. I'm happy to answer all the questions you have.
Perfect. So that is us. So maybe just with a brief show of hands, who of you are on the sort of social startup side of things? So the people that would want to have or receive funding? Okay, a few. And if you maybe can keep up your hands. So who of you are currently in the process of fundraising? All of those, and even more. Okay, that's interesting. So let's make the other test. So who of you is on the giving side in terms of funding? Okay, yeah, I already saw that there's actually some foundations here. And maybe you can also don't be shy, don't be shy. So the people in the background. Interesting. Maybe you can keep up your hands for a bit. And who of you would say you're actively in the business of funding system change? Majority. Okay. Interesting. That's an interesting reframing, I say. Cool. Before we go into the whole funding side of things, we would like to introduce Acker a bit more, so our organization, and sort of our own idea of what system change actually is, so that then later on we can tell you about how we're approaching funding for it. So Acker in a nutshell. So the challenges that we tackle, pretty much at the root cause, is that we're lacking contact with nature. More and more in our society. And actually that's true for kids these days and also for adults. We're mostly, or sort of in our core, actually focusing on kids, especially in our topic today. And what we've seen is that with this lack of contact with nature also comes a lack of appreciation for nature, because what you don't really know, you also can't really value. And that then actually leads to several other problems. You can also call it symptoms. So we have food waste, 30% of food is thrown away. We have unhealthy diets, especially so many already children that are obese and having all these food-related diseases. And general, basically an overconsumption and unhealthy and unsustainable lifestyle. And what we are actually doing is we're trying to tackle this at the root cause. So at this level of the missing contact with nature and this appreciation. And that's why our purpose really is to foster appreciation for food and nature in society. And Acker was founded by Christoph. He's actually an Ashoka fellow himself 10 years ago. And he also has an agricultural background. And understood that the way that he was brought up on a farm and sort of his contact with nature was something that was actually not natural for his children anymore living in the city. So he thought about how can we actually bring this experience, how can we actually bring the farm to the kids. And so what we're doing at Acker at the core is we actually set up school gardens and a whole educational program around this for schools and kindergartens. And we've actually already been on quite a scaling journey since 2014. So by now, we've brought this program to over 1,800 schools and kindergartens, and we've reached more than 300,000 kids. But we're actually doing a lot more than this now even. So we're actually also targeting offices. So we're setting up office gardens. We're setting up community gardens in neighborhoods. We're actually also setting up gardens in care homes. And we're always sort of connecting this with an educational program on the one hand, but especially with experiences. So it's a lot about experiences around, having fun, learning while having fun, and also being in community. And yeah, as I said, we're already quite on a scaling track, so it's not an early startup anymore. We're 200 people or even more by now. And with the scaling journey also comes the need for more and more money. And especially with the big system change vision that we have, we're in the need of system change funding. So we've actually set up a system change funding alliance last year with some pretty good first results, I would say. But what's our personal system change vision? So our vision is that by 2030, every child should have the opportunity to really experience this contact with nature, this love for nature and for food and vegetables by cultivating and harvesting their own vegetables in their school or kindergarten journey. So we really want to build up this generation that actually knows and values what it eats. That's our system change vision. So let's park that for a bit and let's go into what's actually necessary to really achieve system change. And we don't want to go into this way too much because you're all, I guess, experts at this, being at Ashoka. But of course, there's some stuff you have to think about on the what side of things. So you really need to think about what's your big and long-term vision. You really have to understand the system you're in. You have to understand the big levers, the root causes, the players, understand how you can collaborate for this common goal. And most importantly, stay focused on this mission, which I understand is actually not always that easy. Then on the how side of things, we very much, and I think from our backgrounds, you can also tell, very much believe that it's super important to have this entrepreneurial mindset, which means constantly learning and iterating to really get to where you want to go. And you need to have the right skills, people, infrastructure, but also organizational foundation development to get to the scaling stage. And then we're at Acker very big believers in very rigorous impact measuring and evaluating. We have a whole team doing that in-house. So that's also something that's at our core to really know if we're on this iterating journey to always have these proof points. Is that the right track or do we need to somewhat iterate, right? And then you need the funding side of things. And that's where we want to ask you basically, because many of you said that they're actually actively looking for funding or actually actively giving funding. So yeah, maybe just very briefly, what are the challenges that you have seen in funding system change?
Projectitis.
Yeah. Does everyone know what we mean with this?
No. So most funders, whether it be government funders, foundations, tend to fund new projects.
Yes.
So it needs to be new, even if you have a model that already works. And also it's might be 1 year, if you're lucky, it's 3, but it's very seldom long-term. And so you need to reinvent yourself all the time, even if you have a model that is ripe to scale, but you're just not allowed to. So it means that I often have to basically put good old wine in new bottles.
Such a waste of time.
And it's just not transparent, it's not authentic, it's a little bit of waste of time, so, yeah.
Is it also about ownership, about a foundation or someone wanting to own a project so that they can put their label on it?
That's also
That's
one of
part
the
project
challenges.
life. Okay.
Thank you. I think you raise your first.
Long-term outcomes from the position of the foundation is difficult when you don't have the outcomes immediate. I know it's not possible when we're talking about the system change, but it's difficult to explain this inside the foundation. And if you, I'm coming from the Erste Foundation, it's a big foundation in Prague. We found system change, but it's a constant storytelling about why it's necessary to stay there longer than 1 to 3 years.
So you would have, sorry,
Like a storytelling to your boards or
storytelling explanation also? Yeah.
explanations plus.
And then I
think it's related to projects like this, but most foundations fund organizations, and we're talking about systems. So funding collaborations, funding in ways that enable collaborations that work across systems, rather than just through single organizations. The gap.
As an extension to his point, competition between different organizations, particularly international and local entities, especially local entities that are more proximate than an international organization. And this is a very common problem in the global south. So you find that the big organizations get the big money that doesn't actually address systems change. And you find that the small organizations that work at the local level that are actually trying to have to fight this big behemoth of organizations that have all the money. So that's also a disruption. Systems change.
competition, but it's also small versus large.
Yeah, local versus international.
Local versus international,
That's the relationship.
Bureaucracy with EU funding, amongst others, government funding. I mean, it's when you need to put aside 20% of the budget for consultants, and then you need to have another 20% of the budget for administration to make sure that you do it in the right way. There's not much money left for impact.
So I'm a startup since second social enterprise that I have. So it's now we're at the pre-growth stage. So it's finding the sweet spot. So we are for profit, but we have impact as its core in everything we do. So maybe I'm an odd man out here in Ashoka because woman out, yeah. And because we are a social enterprise, we have clear goals, we have investors, but then we do focus on impact metrics and so on. But we are ticked off from many foundations saying, oh no, we're not going to fund you because you're for profit. So, but then the things we're achieving is pretty much on par with the other nonprofits or whatever. So what's the sweet spot for foundations to say, okay, you're working on it? I mean, is it a matter of conversation saying, okay, we want to discuss ownership or, build a foundation that it belongs, I don't know, whatever that is. Because I think I know many other founders in my position. Because I think it's also very scary to be a nonprofit and a foundation and just rely on the few who fund you than on the market. So for us, it was a conscious choice to rely on the market, but it's much broader than just a few institutions which give you, what I mean? So, but I think there is a sweet spot where we could work together still in this private public thing. So I want to know what is it and how would we go forward?
Oh, wow. Let's start it back.
Maybe it was a little bit the same thing that, but understanding gap between the private sector, non-governmental and public sector.
I also think, do I say ignorance or not knowing who to approach? I can remember when I started my project, I didn't know who to talk to. I was just sharing what I was doing on social media. Then I got a mail from Ashoka. They found me. I believe quite a number of people don't even know there is a funding for the assistant change idea. So I don't know how to explain that. They always say, so we have to go to
Of course, about accessibility.
accessibility, yeah.
System change can take a very long time, and if you're in for a 15-year ride, that's quite difficult to fund.
Maybe a bit also connected to what we heard before,
Yeah.
like if you have the big milestone there, how do you fill the gap in the storytelling? You have another point.
And an extension to that point is that because system change takes quite a bit of time, especially if you're looking at working with a government, there's a risk aversion to any kind of change that you're bringing in, especially if it disrupts certain interests and structural, certain incentive structures that already exist and people benefit from. So for example, I'll give you one very quick example. To try to open up the government of my country to data, to say, let people come in and start updating, for example, the system for water asset inventory. The government doesn't want that because it means they have to open up and let people come in and see what they have. And that's something they're very risk averse. So I think the risk aversion is something else that sort of retards the progress, which is part of the reason why it takes a long time to achieve, because if they've never seen it, it doesn't exist. So they don't want to be the first one to take the risk of trying it out.
Yeah, good point. Maybe one last one.
Running out of space.
Yeah, I would say in business also we have incentives more for projects, of good project management and not for systemic change management.
Yeah,
And that's why it's very difficult to invest in system change.
yeah, very much so. I mean, that also connects a bit to the project
Yeah, I
titles.
just want to say, do you find that here in Project Titus? Yeah.
Maybe try and cut it off here because we also want to get into the solution space. But I hear there's lots of experiences on that in the room. Actually, in some ways more than the ones that we found, but these are the ones that we've been sort of facing. So yeah, Project Titus for sure, something that we've seen, and with this comes restricted funding. So you jump from project to project instead of the big vision, and that can actually lead to vision drift. So we talked about focus being super important, and this can be the opposite. Then yeah, you want to have room for iteration, take risks, right? We heard about risk aversion, so that doesn't really connect with the idea of needing innovation and actually taking risks to actually get to these big goals. Then, of course, you need to scale probably your organization. And for that, you need, first of all, growth funding. And we've seen that there's, I don't know if a lot, but some also unrestricted money in the sort of early stages of impact startups, but a lot fewer at the later stages. So growth funding, and then particularly funding that you can use to actively develop your organization to that scaling point. We've actually just encountered big organizational transformational processes in the last 2 years when we were on this scaling journey, because we had to set up our team completely different from 20 to 200 people, obviously. And then I think you also mentioned this idea of, well, in a system you probably need to collaborate. So you want to incentivize collaboration, but that also often doesn't really fit into the project based boxes. Yeah, so these are some of the challenges in terms of funding landscape. So we're actually talking and maybe just positioning ourselves very much from a German kind of perspective in this topic, because we're an organization that's based in Germany, operating in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland with our programs. And also most of our funders are from that region. So I think that's necessary to position in this room. But so the landscape in Germany that we've seen is very much on this side of things. So I think we actually have Project Titus, on the slide. And don't get me wrong, like this is super important for us. So this is a very big part of where our growth has come from, and probably also still will in the future. We need this as a basic foundation to scale our programs. So we're definitely also relying on project-based funding. And this is where most of the money is right now. But luckily, we also see some, especially foundations, moving into structural funding, structural support, where you can, for example, finance this transformational process that we've undergone 1 or 2 years ago. But there's very few money on the right side of things, on the really funding big visions and system changes. And here it's about promoting the goal and funding the goal instead of the projects or the structures along the way. It's about unrestricted funding. It's about openness and trust. It's also how you sort of, approach the relationship between the funder and the fundee. And the way we actually look at system change funding, and this is once again a bit influenced by our for-profit background, where in the for-profit venture capital world, the goal is always the exit. So you sell your company to someone else, or the IPO or something. So of course, we don't want to sell our company, but we sort of see the system change as a semi-exit, where in a way, we will hopefully make ourselves obsolete once we've reached this goal. Probably not 100%, maybe we will somehow change a role, somehow, be in the business of protecting the system, or transferring what we've learned in this system to other systems. But for sure, the idea is that in a way we make ourselves obsolete. And this is still rather rare in thinking, especially translated into money. So looking at the first case that we want to talk about, this is venture philanthropy. Who of you has heard or is familiar with the term venture philanthropy? A few. Perfect. Who is familiar with venture capital? More. So once again, venture capital, that's where we come from. So this for-profit, hockey stick side of things, where you're in the business of placing these super big bets on something that has high risk, but potentially will give you this super high financial return. So you're looking for these big outliers, the ones that will, return your whole portfolio, where all the others were write-offs. You're basically just optimizing for these very few big outliers. This is the idea of venture capital. And basically venture philanthropy is taking a lot of this thinking and applying it to philanthropy, to the impact world. So some people actually also call it philanthrocapitalism, which I find interesting. Here it is about taking high risks, but with the idea of, in the best case scenario, also earning high impact as a result. And yes, there is a long-term horizon. There's a focus on scaling. Interestingly enough, there's different types of funding. Somewhere we've looked for venture philanthropy funds. There are some that only donate in like non-profit organizations, but also some in for-profit impact organizations, which I find interesting that here the boxes are not that clear actually. Then there's also different types of funding. So you have donations, you also have loans, but you also have equity investments. So there's different types of this. It's a lot about standardization in the process. Also some of the ideas have been taken from the venture capital world of things. Interestingly enough, many of these organizations actually also come from the venture capital world. So for example, Draper, Richards, Kaplan, most of these are actually also US based, or even like from the Silicon Valley. So Draper, Richards, Kaplan, they actually are the for-profit side of things, or venture capital side of things. For me, it was super normal that we talked about, not only investing money, but also trying to go beyond money and help with operational support, network, and all these things, and knowledge sharing. And I've understood that this is also sort of a debate or a discussion in the philanthropy world, but it's still not the norm, right? But the venture philanthropy funds, they're very much in the business of setting up these structures of capacity building and supporting entrepreneurs along the way beyond money only. And they very much have the idea that it's important to have this entrepreneurial mindset. They very much invest in teams or in founders and their visions and their ability to be entrepreneurial, to iterate, and to find the best solution. But they're also very strictly monitoring the trajectory, looking at business KPIs, looking at impact KPIs. So it's not about data measurement. And my view on this is also very much influenced by the way I look at venture capital. So I think there's a lot of things that are amazing about this. So yes, you actually have these big pots of money to actually, place these big bets and foster really great visions. And you have the support beyond money. You have this clear goal orientation and impact evaluation and orientation. But in some way, it also preserves old power structures. So there is still a pretty big imbalance. On the one hand, you have super wealthy, high net worth individuals dictating where money goes, also in the philanthropy world. And oftentimes with somehow a lack of accountability from third parties or regulators. And you also find this power imbalance, the way I've seen it in venture capital, also here between the funder and the fundee, because it's still a lot about monitoring, reporting, it's somehow not on eye level. That's the way I perceive it, at least in some of these cases. And maybe that's also connected to this idea of very much valuing KPIs, which I think on the one hand is a good thing, but it can also lead to sort of neglecting the more qualitative factors like empathy, community building, that are actually super important for systemic change in this way, right? So coming to the next there's
one question, because my understanding from venture capital, or where this thinking comes from, is exit orientation. Like we are there for a part of time, and then the successful ones are going public.
Yeah.
So have they an idea about how the ideas or the organizations that they fund with this really big amounts of money can be transferred to the public sphere? And then, because a lot of them are small states, if you think about the US, they are thinking about reducing the size of the state and more private and things like that. But in Europe, I'm working for a public funding institution. Our mandate is to look how can we bring it into the public sphere, like that these ideas can be taken up by public budgets, transform the welfare state idea, things like that. So is this applicable?
That's a super good question. I think, and probably would have to ask each of these organizations themselves. I mean, I can on the one hand say how we look at our exit case, which is a bit of what I explained. We actually had this discussion with one of the funds where we sort of discussed our own exit scenario, and it resonated a lot with their thinking, but also with the idea that probably somehow we would not exit completely from the landscape and close shop, but somehow have a different kind of protecting our system change idea, model kind of role, or even also still innovating on the model, even if, for example, it's transferred to the state level, which is also.
So it's about controlling keeping a little bit of control about what.
I mean, control is also an interesting word. You could also say guarding somehow, but yeah, potentially. But then again, I think this may actually differ a lot from fund to fund and also from organization to organizations. For example, if you have these for-profit impact startups, then an exit is still possible somehow. In an exit scenario, so I think it's a super interesting question for sure. Yeah. So let's briefly talk about collaborative philanthropy. And in my view, there's not very super clear lines between the two, but somehow I see this as an evolution on this idea of venture philanthropy. So who is familiar with the term collaborative philanthropy? Two people. So
it's not a very well-defined field, right? I'm not sure it's
I think all of these are sort of, yeah, more concepts, for sure. But I've tried to sort of find some distinctive factors for these not so well-defined terms. And what I would say is that here it's taking some of these ideas of venture philanthropy. So the idea that, yes, we want to go to the, big visions, in this case, the systemic vision, systemic changes. And we want to place these big bets to actually get there. So also a lot of money is involved. So sometimes even more than 10 billion per organization, which is a lot, but over a long time horizon, so maybe 5 to 6 years or even longer. But here it's a lot about collaborating, not only on the organizational level, but also on the funders level. And this for me was actually also quite surprising, coming from the for-profit world, that I haven't seen that so much in the non-profit world, of actually collaborating and co-funding together, which is a super normal idea in for-profit world. So here, these funds are actually pooling a lot of money from different organizations. Some of these, even the ones that I placed in the sort of venture capitalist and venture philanthropy bucket before. And these can be different types of funders. So these can be super wealthy individuals, philanthropists, this can be family offices, this can be corporate foundations, so also different types. But as I said, it's about this collaborating factor, also on the funding side of things. It's about placing these big bets, not only in the early, but especially in the growth stages, where you've shown the potential to actually have, be on the brink to really change whole systems. And sort of the more innovative factor here from my side is maybe the last one. It's about a trust-based partnership between the giving and the receiving funding organization. So here it's once unrestricted funding, but it's a partnership. It's really understood as a partnership on eye level, where both parties can actually also learn from each other. Both parties also need each other somehow. And it's about valuing each other's time as well, also in the process, and communicating openly. So this is more of a mindset evolution, I would say. One example that I brought is co-impact. And so they're sort of a global collaborative. A lot of the core or founding players stem from the US, but by now they have sort of a global footprint. Launched in 2017. They raised maybe even by now more than $700 million in collaborative funding. You see some of the sort of founding individuals, but also organizations on the right. They focus on health, education, economic opportunity in the Global South. And what they do is they give unrestricted funding, they give large checks, 5 to even $20 million dollars, but over these longer lifespans and sort of in tracks. And their strategy is to really focus on these systemic levers. For example, policy making is a big one, and also on collaborations, on really understanding the players in the system and giving these incentives to collaborate. And they will also support the organizations. And the first stage is to actually, first of all, draft out their system change strategy, because that's also not an easy task. So first of all, draft the strategy and always revise it, then build the organizations around it, and constantly also measure impact. So I think this is also a nice example of capacity building that we've seen here. And on this mindset level or idea, I like what I saw here in their handbook, where they say that they prescribe through the trust-based philanthropy principles. So this is not from them, but this is like principles that they've, as I said, subscribed to. And here, for example, it's about this eye level and, for example, valuing each other's time, also in an application process, where they will also do their own research to validate if a candidate is actually valid, rather than implementing these super long application processes, for example. And where it's also about this open communication and so on. So I think this was also a nice example of this new mindset. Okay. So maybe I would leave it here with regard to the external examples and move on to how we sort of build the system from the other side of things. So now I talked about the foundations, but we're actually a social organization ourselves. And since we haven't seen so much of this, especially in the German landscape, we just thought we will build it ourselves for our own purposes. And that's the Acker System Change Alliance. Just as a reminder, as I said, this is the system change vision that we have. 2030, every child should experience, this love and contact with nature, cultivating, harvesting their own vegetables. And what does that actually mean translated into numbers? That would mean that if we want to reach a whole year of students in kindergarten or preschool, that this would be 800,000 children per year, which is quite a number, but we've actually sort of already 1/10 of the way there because we're already reaching 80,000 kids per year with our programs. But of course, there's still sort of a hockey stick to go to sort of accomplish the other 90% of the scale. And so the strategic levers that we have identified are, on the one hand, using digitalization to scale even more. So we have this learning infrastructure, digital learning infrastructure that we're using to sort of promote our educational products and programs, but also to make our own processes in the background more efficient. So scaling through digitalization is one thing. Then we have a multiplying factor, which are the teachers. So we don't only go to the schools and kindergartens ourselves, but we're also trying to get into the universities where future teachers are taught, or kindergarten teachers as well. And we already sort of bring them the tools and ideas of what we stand for, so that then they can bring these ideas and tools to their future learning organizations. So sort of this multiplying factor. And then last but not least, policy making, which is sort of a new field for us. We actually have now people from politics, the first 2 people from politics actually joining our team, bringing this very new system now into our own organization, and also learning from each other there and thinking about how we can actually change policy itself, and here also use collaboration with other organizations in the field that may share this vision or a similar vision, and how we can be even stronger there together when we talk with policymakers or important stakeholders. And as I said, it's a lot about iteration, so maybe we'll also find other levers and strategies along the way.
I have a question, because many times, especially with American corporate foundations, I have to sign that I will not influence policy. Otherwise, I don't get the money because they're not allowed to. So an example is Coca-Cola Foundation. Have you experienced that is a challenge?
Interesting. I haven't come along that. I got an example. What we've experienced is that we won't get money from foundations to hire people for policy work. But we haven't heard from funders, for example, from project-based funding, that they wouldn't fund our projects or programs. We do this somewhere else, if that's what you mean. So this we haven't come.
I've just seen it with so many US-based corporate foundations that I need to tick a box in all the boxes that I need to tick. And one of them is very specifically that I will not, through my nonprofit organization, try to influence politicians or policy making.
Interesting.
Which is absurd.
Yeah. It's a contradiction.
I would say that's a big hurdle.
It is a hurdle. I take the box and I'm not trying to do it directly, but
Yeah, interesting. Actually, just to add on that, because I would say it's with some of our partners, because we've got some big retail partners. For example, we work with Aldi as being a retailer, and we actually share that same approach to politics. They have got someone in their team working on politics, and we work together in the field. We're actually using their contacts to broaden our horizon. So with many of our big partners, we've actually seen that the very great response to the vision and to also expanding in it. So I would say it's we haven't had that experience at all. No, and I've never seen it somewhere ticking a box.
You work with a lot of American, I
No, we
really
don't.
wonder if it's a.
Yeah.
Probably very
Yeah.
American.
Probably very American. Yeah.
But have you encountered that in other parts of the world?
No, I've never seen it. I've only seen it in America.
I think I've seen something similar to that. It's often under the clause, when you see your contract letter, you see lobbying. It's often tagged lobbying, not to influence a law or something like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
But I think the fine line we do in our organization is advocacy. So we don't do nothing but advocacy.
Smart.
It's super interesting. Wording is key, yeah? Wording is key because also in Germany, I would say lobbying is a very negative term. And we also thought about what to put on the slides in terms of wording here. How upfront are we with this, right? But I mean, like all other types of organizations are doing lobbying, so we may as well do it for good. I mean, yeah.
I think in the UK, it's a legal requirement that non-profits don't influence political processes. So you can't influence the election of an official who's going to back your initiative, which is separated from influencing policy shaping.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would probably be similar in Germany, I assume, but.
Yeah, interesting, interesting point. Okay. So how are we actually approaching that? How does that look in terms of funding trajectory? So maybe some insights. So on the green scale, you see sort of our existing funding pillars. So yeah, maybe about this, but it's sort of but so this is a lot of also the project-based funding, etc. And this will fund the core work of what we do. So this is how we go from 1 kindergarten to 10 kindergartens to 100 kindergartens where we can implement our educational programs. And this will for sure also help us to scale in the future, but we believe that this won't be sufficient. So we're looking for these extra types of fundings, the orange curve, that's unrestricted money that helps us to explore these other alleyways that I just talked about that are more difficult to fund and that are also a bit more risky because we actually don't know what the outcome will be and if it will actually ever transpire, which is also why we're using different ways because we're hoping that this way we can also increase our chances, right? And yeah, so here we actually believe that if we do this right and if we're on the right learning journey, then this orange money, let's say, so the unrestricted money will actually potentially have the biggest scaling impact. Yeah, and so how do we actually approach this? So one thing is we do, of course, in our fundraising journey, we talk to a lot of potential funders and we, pitch them our idea and what we do and the levers and how we think about system change and all these slides basically that we just talked about. But what we also do is we offer them experiences. This is something that's very new to me in my, from the for-profit kind of world where we didn't do it that way. But here it's for sure one of our also key ingredients maybe. So one of the, I would call it lead generation funnels for our System Change Alliance are these Acker dinners, where we are, inviting different types of people. And this can be both funders, but also non-funders. So people with money, but also without. This can also be other sort of organizations, activists, interesting people. And then these different types of funders, which can be more traditional types of funders and foundations, but it can also be founders from for-profit world that have just made these exits and don't know where to put this money. And we will bring them together and just basically have a good time and share these very personal experiences, do it Acker style, which is always in a way a bit scrappy, but still fun and personal. We will invite them to our own vegetable garden, for example. We will do fermentation workshops or natural wine tasting or something. We will always also sort of combine it with interesting input. So we will have a speaker. We will, tell them about what we've just learned in our own journey, but also what other organizations have learned. So we will make it worthwhile, basically. And so far we've actually come quite a long way. So we've by now raised more than half the money for the next 3 years of the goals that we've set ourselves. And I mean, we're still in the fundraising journey. So these are just some of the people and organizations that are actually coming together in the System Change Alliance. So on the one hand, we have foundations, oftentimes progressive, sometimes even a bit younger foundations that are prescribing these principles, for example, also this trust-based philanthropy idea, like the Fantastisch Foundation, now also the Hans Schöpflin Foundation. But we also have some people that are basically, as I said, founders from for-profit world. So this is very much a German startup scene. So you have the travel company founder like Wolf Schopkins from Trivago. You have the Flixbus founders. You have the Signavio founders, which is a big IT startup in Germany. We also have Philip Dames, a venture capital partner. So some people that understand that they also want to donate money in a way how they would invest money as well. And how does this look? So basically we bring all of these people together in this alliance. And this will be a wild mix of bigger partners, institutional partners that will, place bigger checks that can be 100 to maybe even 500K, unfortunately not 10 million, as we saw before in the example, not yet. But in our case, still bigger checks per year, and in the best case, also over at least a 3-year horizon. But then we also combine this with these smaller checks of sort of individuals, and we call them angels, so a bit like the business angel. Now we have the philanthropy angels here. That can maybe give 10 to 50K, but especially with these, we know that they have a lot more to offer than just the money, because they have all this know-how. So for example, the Signavio founders from this IT startup that I talked about, they're actually advising us on our IT roadmap, which is super helpful to have this external validation and insight from people really working in the field day by day. And So as I said previously, one thing that I found surprising in nonprofit world is that there's so little collaboration also on the funding level. So for me, it's super normal that I have a investment board where different key investors will come together with the founders and basically discuss strategy. It's also not all perfect, so it's a lot about, once again, this sort of missing eye level type of relationship, but at least people are coming together and actually aligning on what's been happening and what should actually happen in the future, and what are the ways that they can support along this journey. And this is something that we're trying to mirror here as well. So we're bringing these people, or at least the ones that are willing, together, not only for these fun experiences as well, but also for more strategic workshops where we will take them along on this learning journey, and then maybe even do some breakout sessions where we will discuss, for example, IT strategy on the one hand, policymaking strategy on the other, and so on. Yeah, and as I said before, so of course here as well, it's around sharing these new types of principles. So everyone that comes in sort of also signs up to this idea that we have this long-term focus that we're prescribing to. We want to think and act entrepreneurial. So really leave this entrepreneurial wiggle room, this learning journey, that it's a lot about trust in the end, and not only about control, and it's around about collaboration. But on the other hand, what we can offer them is that it will still be about rigorous impact measurement, although we also know that it's not always that easy to measure impact, especially, as I said before, of these more qualitative and more vague factors. So this is also still a learning journey that we're experiencing around how we could actually apply what we've learned in terms of impact measurement on the program and project level to the systemic level. I think this is something that we're also going to look into even more. This is the Acker System Challenge. And actually now we would like to learn from you. So what other types of organizations have you seen, both on the funding, but also on the organizational level? Do you see some best practice examples, maybe also from other parts of the world? That would be super interesting.
I would like to share something from Central America, where actually a good friend of mine had led an organization for children, helping around, I believe, 2,000 children. They were also, let's say, dependent on philanthropy, and for them it was a shock at some point that the philanthrope said, "There's no more funding from us. We will not give you any more money."
Okay.
And so my question. So basically they had to close down the facilities, they had to fire all of the people, and the organization just didn't exist after all anymore. So my question is, in what way do you see a sort of or in irresponsibility from taking money from philanthropists from which you are dependent financially, especially when you talk about long term, but at the same time you are making yourself dependent from someone that can just cut funding without any good reason. We heard also that there's no, in the US, for example, you're not allowed to act politically, but any post you make about this subject could be, let's say, they could say that's political, so we cut the funding, yeah. So that's my question.
Yeah, that's a super good question. So in your example, there was basically one big philanthropic funding organization that funded them, right? So I think this is a big risk for sure, as you explained. Huh? So for us, in a way, we're mitigating risk by not only relying on one type of funding, but actually having all these different pillars. So before I showed the green and the orange line, and already the green line of our sort of foundational or like base funding pillars, they're quite diverse. So here we're taking money from foundations, state money, from corporates as well, corporates that will directly fund, let's say 10 schools in their neighborhood, for example. Then we're also getting money from health insurances, actually, a prevention type funding, because they understand that it has a positive preventive factor for health, even mental health, etc., in the community. So these are already quite diverse in terms of our base funding, and then also in the orange pillar, so the system change funding. This is also different types of organizations. We may have some bigger donors in there, but there's not one big donor that we're super dependent on, and I think this is also a big plus for us. It's also difficult because you have fundraising is quite a complex endeavor. But there's sort of risk mitigation in that. And we've actually also seen this during the COVID pandemic, that some types of funding, in this case, especially the corporate money, went away. Or not only COVID, but afterwards in the financial crisis. So there, for example, state funding was super important for us, and foundations that still stuck with it through these crisis times. So I think, this is something to definitely look forward, that you're sort of broad in your pillars.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting. We actually have a similar program. What you have with the kindergartens and the schools, we have it the same, but it's for preventing exploitation and trafficking in schools. The same model. I was like, this is surreal, because we started with I think 1,000 students, and now we're like 120,000 students.
What's your organization?
Eliberare from Romania, but that was not the point. Basically, it got me thinking a lot about where the responsibility lies when it comes to a model that you're implementing, and how do you convince your investor funders and so on that the exclusivity part, I think that's super important in terms of how do you actually exit from a partnership, and also it's sustainable. So what we've learned so far is that one of the good examples is that when you find someone to invest for a period of time, and they know that phase is super important, but afterwards you can have some other funders that are coming to complement your work and to continue building the work that you've done, because some of these solutions and the systemic ones are not for 6 months or 12 months or even 2 years. They're probably 5 to 10 years if you want to see real impact. So I think one of the ways in which we can see the success of a systemic project or program, I think it's if there are many other funders that are willing to continue supporting your work, and is not seen as a cycle of a year and a half and I solved the problem, because you usually don't get results in a year and a half or 2 years. And I think the projectification piece, it's super, it's giving us a lot of pressure in the sense that, again, it comes back to responsibility. You have the responsibility of a field where you want to have impact, but then if you get into projects that are only short term and you don't see them as a puzzle, which eventually will lead you to the big impact that you're seeing, I think it's very hard for the other partners, even their foundations or grants or whatever, to see what you're trying to do. So I think in a way, one of the way we're looking at success is diversifying this funding sources, involving also, there are a lot of examples, and even with us, some of the things, smaller things that we're doing within the program, they are taken by the government and implemented by themselves, so we're not doing them anymore. So those components are not done by us anymore because we started with it. We let them know how we do it. They took the program, they're doing it. So I think it's super important to look at because it's not like in business, that's what I'm saying. Exiting, it's not like it, for nonprofits, it's not exactly the same like it is in business. It's rather finding more people, believing in your idea, looking at long-term and guarding your own field, guarding the idea that you're having and believing in it. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So I have a question about collaboration. I wonder if you could expand on how I assume you mean collaborating with other partners who are delivering schools or so on within that funding model. And then I have a couple of examples to share, but I'd love to hear more about
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. So you mean how we collaborate on the organizational?
Yeah, because you talk about collaboration within the model, and I see you have a collaboration you have a funding alliance.
Yeah.
But what's the collaborative piece within the sort of the delivery?
Yeah, I think that's something that we're actually currently building up. So what we're doing, there's, for example, something, so once again, very German ecosystem-based example, but it's called BIP, like the Bundesverband Society for Innovative Programs. And we're, for example, we're coming together with different other educational programs and social organizations that are all sort of offering different types of innovations for a more sustainable education system. And where we come together and we bring these resources together and we try to open each other doors into some of the organizations where one partner is already present and others aren't. This is something that we're just starting sort of, and where an infrastructure is just being built up. But I would say this is still sort of in the pilot phase and not yet we have a super established system for it phase.
Great to hear. Yeah, I guess with the topic of this summit around true participation, participatory grant making and participatory philanthropy, I think, is incredibly important to recognise as one of the emerging trends in the field. And I think when we're thinking about funding systems change, it's really interesting to think about how the whole system can be present and not just individual organisations. So I think this is a developing field, but some of the pooled funds that you see that aren't then funding individual organisations but are funding either multiple organisations or they're participatory in how they're being decided, like the Edge Fund in the UK.
Edge Fund?
The Edge Fund, all of the applicants to the Edge Fund are then the decision makers in the funding.
Interesting.
So the field has the vote.
I love that.
And this is what I care about, is opening up the decision making in philanthropy, because I think the power balance is a real problem.
Yeah.
And just to mention another example that I think we can learn a lot from if succeeding and failing is collective impact, where I think the critique of collective impact approaches is it centralizes power. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not part of the theory of change that this group of organizations have come up with, then actually you're distanced from decision making.
Yeah.
And so I think participation and listening are the antidote to that, and we can decentralize by listening and having a much more inclusive approach to our decision making, and opening that all up, as well as also being coordinated and systemic in how we think about getting funds up.
Yeah. How do you actually think about these things in your own organizations or like foundations?
I'm starting to with Ashoka. I'm 3 days into my.
Curious where this goes, yeah. But maybe actually we can, I think there was 2 other hands, but also hear from some of the foundations how you guys think about these things. And for example, also this mindset of collaboration, but also the trust-based relationship. I would be super curious to hear, but you had a question or an idea.
Yeah, so my name is Manuela Pastora. I'm from Beringer Ingelheim, and I work for more than 10 years with underserved communities in Kenya now. And we have also kitchen gardening programs like yours, 1,000 kitchen gardenings. And thank you for everything, because it made things very clear. What I'm questioning a bit is it enough, what we count? And I mean, what I like a lot is the way how you put it already, because it's much more holistic. But the big question I have is the kitchen gardening alone really changing the system? Or do we need also, for example, to consider a third dimension of measurement and also action, of course, which would be how does it connect to other projects that lead to your vision?
Yeah.
And this is what I miss a lot, where I'm looking also for people who have ideas. I just wanted to bring that up, and it would be great to be in contact after.
Yeah, let's for sure stay in touch. I mean, in our sort of impact evaluation framework, of course, we have many factors that we look at, and we try also to look at different stakeholders and how they're impacted. So the kids, of course, the teachers, but also the parents, for example. So how does this also translate into households? You know, so this is already, but this is still sort of our direct or more direct impact. And I hear you're also talking about like
network analysis,
etc. Yeah, I mean, for example, what we're also think about, and especially comes up even more in the policy making field, is how does it connect, for example, with how food is prepared in kitchens, in schools, or for example, in care homes. So these are already things that we're starting to think about.
And then how
we're also
to
connecting with other partners, because we also don't have to do all of this ourselves, but think about how we can there bridge the gaps. But for sure, it's that's where we're still on the development journey, I would say.
But on the related to this, on the pragmatic level, in your situation, I would connect directly with the more generation house. It's like a community center. And for example, the more generation that I know, it's a kindergarten in, it's a canteen in.
Yeah.
And when you make a collaboration with all more generation houses in Germany, maybe
that's actually something that we're also doing right now. Yeah.
Maybe that's a way to integrate this model in the social ecosystem, because I love the idea of more generation.
Yeah, same here. So this is something that we're testing now. So it sort of still comes from the idea, because as you said, they still have a kindergarten. So we're testing both like our normal kindergarten program, but we're also seeing more parents, for example, directly joining. So we're thinking about how we can offer also experiences in the gardens that sort of connect, you know, kids to adults and what we can do there. But yeah, sure, it's a super interesting anyway.
So we are a very small organization and mostly in private finance, and we start to think about work with philanthropy capital. But the question: how many people in your organization work on the field of finance the organization?
Yeah, it's a super valid question. So we have a partner team, which is basically doing the fundraising, and I think we're 10 with even more.
Yeah, is that around 20 in the classical, in the green side of money, basically. So because that is quite established, and that is a team that is
20 and
around, I'd say, could be a bit. We'd have to count, but somewhere.
Yeah, but let's say almost a tenth of the organization. I don't know if it's actually that many, but a lot of people. So we have people only looking, and it's quite professionalized, I would say, in our organization, with also the type of money that we're also connecting, right? So we have a whole team that's just looking at foundations and establishing the relationships there, and also keeping the relationships with the ones we already have. And one that's looking at state money, one that's looking at these health insurance partners around this whole prevention pillar that I talked about. So yeah, that's already quite a complexity in the funding pillars. So the downside of the diversification and the risk mitigation of funding here is that we actually need a lot of overhead just to raise the money. That's yeah, that's the way it is.
So I wanted to give an example from Denmark. I am Danish, but I'm based in Berlin, where you have this collaborative philanthropy because 4 of the largest Danish foundations have gone together to fund system change, and what they've set up, it's called Institute for Wild Problems. And I mean, it's a very catchy, sexy title, so you can remember it, and a focus around mission-based. So they have sort of said, what are the main challenges in Denmark right now? How do we gather the right people, stakeholders around these different missions? But what we also see now is, for instance, the municipality of Aarhus, so the second largest city in Denmark, have even inside of the municipality set up an institute for wild problems in their municipality. And they have the backing from like the top administration, which is really, really nice. And the top administration has said, if we are not on the borderline of making things that are illegal, we are not courageous enough. And that I would love to see in Germany. and
that's for sure, I see that on the horizon.
But I think there's a lot of things happening around this in Denmark that a lot of other countries in Europe can learn from. They're also doing podcasts. Unfortunately, it's only in Danish. So I would hope that they would also start doing this in English so more people can learn from it. But so that's just an example. But I would love to hear from the philanthropists and in the room. Like, I've never in my 10 years of being a social entrepreneur seen foundations actually come together to fund us. I would love to see it more, but I'm wondering on the structure side of the foundations, why that is not happening. If it's a structural thing or it's just that we haven't practiced it before, so let's do a pilot. To the people in the back.
Yeah. I think there's a response.
But yeah, something like that, like if that helps, I would be the last to defend the philanthropists or the big family businesses, anything in that way. Just please bear in mind that they are structured a very unique way. So it's not easy, even though if they want to do something together, many times the first hurdle to get much easier to get 2 for-profit company to do a JV, a joint venture, than to pull 2 family together, let's say that from one from Europe, another one from Asia or America, to reach an agreement, to fund something on the longer term, and sign their name, because the way they structured, the way they usually sort of business, to give away money business, it's very restricted and very personal. And it's not that moment when they sign the thing, but what happens afterwards. The first week, the first year, when usually the things, which has been promised, because the thing is with system change that, we think about it, we have an idea, we even had something on the ground, but exactly for that reason you mentioned, because we have to go bold and to try certain things, big pivot, to do things differently, maybe 2 years ahead. And for that, you signed the paper and said, well, we did this and we have a great KPI. We can show, our impact, but we need to make addendum to our sort of contract. And then it goes back to one family and to another one, and those family needs to get an understanding. They have to get on the board. And if that money, it goes even higher, let's say that if you're not talking about a few 100,000, which is quite a lot of money, but many times it's into the millions, the business of millions, then they need to get out to talk with the family. And these family, just in Europe, the few It's not about me, so, but I had the privilege to work with them and know that it's not one, but 50-something people. So it's, and they learning, for the better first, they learning how to cooperate, and their systems, I mean, this foundation needs to learn a sort of portfolio management. This is pretty new for them. I mean, that's usually, I give them money and every year we met, you sign the thing that everything goes well, that's okay. But getting into a different type of sort of cooperation. And the last thing to mention it's not just to give away money, but to give away control. Because end of the day, they are in the position to have the money, but you guys are in the position that you are on the field, and hopefully you know what to do, how to deliver change. And it's not easy from the other side of all.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's easier to sort of collect people or align people around a very strict financial goal. I want to make this type of ROI. That's in the end more visible, more clear, and everyone can sort of prescribe it the same idea of financial ROI, rather than what's the other thing we're looking for? Impact. What does that mean for me? It's super personal. There's lots of emotions. And
I think that is a key word. It's personal. It's personal. They have their own story. And someone told the storytelling part. If you find a way into their own story, it's much.
I think that's a super good that's a super good point for our sort of final learning slide, because we also thought about what are the key takeaways. Somehow it doesn't want to. Yes. Now, so what are our personal learnings from this journey so far? And we're still in the middle of it. So one is to actually dare to think big, dare to think really big, focus on these super big levers. But then also you said storytelling, be able to communicate, define, but also communicate this big vision. Because you want, in the end, it is personal for people as well. And with this notion, build a community of partners, of multipliers, of potential funders, not only those giving money, but also those that can give something beyond, be it network or know-how. And then also approach people outside of the philanthropic bubble. So we've also approached some of these founders, as I said, that so far actually haven't been giving money or away from philanthropy that much, and actually haven't heard of systems change before. So in a way, we're actually even educating some people outside of our own bubble. And as I said, we offer community experiences, new insights, and we're basically understanding that we're all on the learning journey together, and we're just taking them along with it, basically. But then on the other side, we ask for trust in this learning journey and true partnership. And on our side, we deliver transparency as well, and try to do as much as we can in terms of impact evaluation to sort of feed that trust. But as I said, that's also a bit about the mindset in both sides of things. So yeah, that's our key takeaways. And it was wonderful to actually hear also from a lot of you that are both facing some of the same challenges. So we talked a lot about that, but we also talked a lot about super cool examples and solutions. So I'm super hopeful and curious where we will go as an ecosystem. Yeah, thanks a lot.